In today's show, it's Charlotte Hornets time. A fantasy preview, Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. We're here to talk Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte Hornets. We've done Nets, we've done Celtics, we've done Hawks. Warnie.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
Quick mention, if you don't know, the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl is on. Categories and points leagues. We're going to get 720 teams in. 360 for categories, 360 for points. All of the rules will be linked in a document down below for a points league. The scoring is standard Yahoo scoring. Sorry, just completely blanked there. These are $25 entry leagues with a big grand total winner of $4,500 to the winner of both individual ones, the category and the points league. We're recruiting people, and later in this show, you will get information on how you enter for the Charlotte Hornets division for both category and points. What you need to do is you need to send an email to that address, LOFB Bowl, BOWL, at gmail.com. That's where you send it. In the subject line, write Hornets categories or Hornets points, or you can write Hornets cats if you want, to say whether you want to be in the category league or in the points league. And then later on in the show, I'll tell you a specific question that I want answered in the subject. People are throwing so many different things in their applications. We've filled up the Atlanta Hawks divisions. We've filled up the Boston Celtics divisions. I've sent those emails out, so if you haven't got one for those divisions, then unfortunately you missed those ones. Don't take it as a personal affront. There's just so many that are coming in. I still haven't done the Nets ones yet, so the Brooklyn Nets invites still haven't gone out, so be on the lookout for that. And the Hornets one is coming next. You will get a question later on for you to answer to be a part of that. But remember, Hornets cats in the subject line, Hornets points if you want points league in the subject line. And then we will talk more about what we need to get into or what question you actually need to answer to get into the Charlotte Hornets division of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. So let's look at how the Hornets break down for this coming season. What's their schedule look like? Low quality game number, 47. It's not many, averages 51. So that means your Hornets players are going to be playing on the higher volume days. So your back-end Hornets guys, your flyer types, your waiver wire type players, they are going to be less useful than they are for some teams who might play 60 quality games. It's not something that you need to take huge amounts of attention or devote huge amounts of attention to in a draft setting. But it's something just to have in the back of your mind. They also play a league low, or not league low, sorry, close to a league low, 12 back-to-backs. That's below average. There's no one on this team outside of Gordon Hayward who you think that's a risk for, but I don't think coming into the season that Hayward's going to routinely sit back-to-backs. In general, there's only going to be a few of those guys this year, I think, but it's just if someone gets hurt, does the back-to-backs impact them? But as I've mentioned before, there's the most back-to-backs is 15. I think the fewest is 11. It's not a huge difference. It's 4 games. Or 4 back-to-backs difference over the course of a season. It's not a huge amount. The thing with the Hornets schedule is the playoff schedule's rough. If you finish your playoffs on March 19th, which I will say it again, I've said it a lot of times, I will say it every one of these shows, I recommend you finish a head-to-head season on March the 19th. That is when your playoffs should end, March the 19th. Doesn't matter what week number it is, the date is March the 19th. If you finish then, the Hornets play 10 games in that 3-week playoff schedule. A 4-4-2 schedule. And that 2 in grand final week is rough. There are quite a few teams that have 2-game weeks through fantasy playoffs, which is never a great thing, is it? We never want 2-game weeks. There are quite a few teams. who do have these 2-game weeks throughout the playoffs, though. So in the past, we've just rarely had those. There are a lot this year for some reason. The March 26th playoffs, if you finish on March 26th, they've also got 10 games. It's a 4-2-4 schedule, so at least it's 4 in championship week, but there's 2 in semifinal week. And then if you play until the April the 2nd, which is default Yahoo playoffs, they have 9 games. 2, 4, and 3. 3 in championship week, 2 in the first week. Overall, it's just a pretty rough fantasy schedule for Hornets players. So we like the value of LaMelo Ball. We like the value of Terry Rozier. We like the value of where you're drafting Gordon Hayward, for example. But it's not an ideal playoff situation. Now, I am not making many decisions, if any decisions, in a fantasy draft based on fantasy playoffs. Because so much stuff can change and happen and whatever. But it can be used, I guess, as a tiebreaker. When we're looking at, do I pick this guy or do I pick this guy? It can be used as a tiebreaker. And the tiebreaker for the Hornets, it's not particularly strong with some bad playoff schedules there. We'll get into talking about the Hornets more in a second. Before we do that, BetOnline remains the number one spot for all of your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Week 2 of the NFL, week 3 of college football is upon us, and all of those odds and lines are present over at BetOnline. And let's randomly have a look. The Jacksonville Jaguars, my man Trevor Lawrence, they're 3.5-point underdogs against the Colts this week. The last time these two teams met, the Colts choked away a playoff spot by losing to the Jags. Will they do it again? I don't know, but you can find out all of those odds over at BetOnline. It's your continued source for all of your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. It's the fastest and easiest way also to check in on all of your favorite sports and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline is where the game starts. BetOnline is also teaming up with Locked On NBA to put the top 50 players in the NBA. They've got a list. It's happening September 19th. Which NBA player moves the betting line the most? They've got together. They've figured it out. The top 50 most valuable players in the NBA. You can find it on Locked On NBA, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. All right. What impacts the projections this season? Number 1 is Miles Bridges. Now, there'll be a lot of podcasts and shows that'll be like, oh, Miles Bridges, don't want to really talk about that. Don't want to really touch that. I'll touch it, right? I'll talk about it. I got no problem. What he is accused of is disgusting. And if he's guilty, and I can't be 100% sure on this. I'm sitting here without the facts of the evidence. It looks pretty unlikely that he's innocent, to be honest. Like, it looks pretty unlikely. And if he is guilty, he should be in jail, really. Like, that's just the simple fact of it. If he's guilty of doing what he did, or what he's alleged to have done through we see the photos, we saw the video recording of his son witnessing this stuff, he should be in jail. Simple as that. What it impacts for fantasy, it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, it means nothing fantasy, right? For the health and safety of his family. But we've got to talk about it. At this point, Miles Bridges plays for nobody. He's not under contract. That could very easily change even when you're listening to this. I've got no idea when you listen to this. But he currently is not under contract. He is not on the Hornets. He is a restricted free agent. He has not signed a qualifying offer. It's been tendered to him. And there was reports the Hornets had pulled that qualifying offer. They have not. But he is not under contract. So I guess the Hornets are waiting for more clarification. I don't know when that clarification's coming. We might get something at Media Day through training camp. But my expectation is that Miles Bridges does not play this season. Either through him not being signed, not under contract, him being in jail, or being suspended. Now, I know in the past the NBA has been pretty lenient with some suspensions. But if I just don't see how he plays this season. I don't have any problem if you are in a draft and you take Miles Bridges with one of your last 2 picks and you're drafting now, and we hope we get clarification by opening night. I'm not here to tell you shouldn't do it for moral reasons, whatever. All right? You choose to do that however you want. I've got no problem with doing that personally. But if he's, I also think that that's one of the shittest bloke moves that Miles Bridges, what he did, it's just disgusting. It's terrible. Do I want to... could that still win me value on fantasy? Well, that's an individual question, isn't it? I personally don't think I would do it. I don't know. I've got I'm not a massive Shiploke fan, as you're well aware. I rail against people forgetting Shiplokeness. Lance Stevenson, Derrick Rose, the things they've done in the past. Kendrick Nunn was charged with domestic violence as well. But in the end, fantasy ends up being a game in how you approach it. Are you doing it to win? Are you doing it for enjoyment? And that's your decision to make. The other impact that Miles Bridges has is what it changes on the Hornets roster in terms of rotations. If he's there, if he plays, he probably has 4th, 3rd round value, maybe 2nd round. If he's not, well, it's a gaping hole.
Giggity.
I imagine that PJ Washington Jr. just starts in place of Miles Bridges. And all of my projections have no Bridges there for the season. He's just not there. So Washington starts, Hayward's at the 3. But if Bridges plays, then maybe Bridges is at the 3. Maybe Hayward comes off the bench. Washington's at the 4. Regardless, Hayward, Washington, then Cody Martin, and Jalen McDaniels and Kelly Oubre, they all get squeezed. If Bridges is gone, then they all get bumps. Including Rozier and LaMelo Ball. They all get bumps if Bridges is gone. So it's still a question. It's not as much of a question as some other teams' rotations. Because again, there's got to be like a 2% chance that Miles Bridges is there opening night. It's got to be. It's got to be so low. But it's possible. And that could screw everything up. The other thing is they have a new coach. You wish they had a new front office, or maybe even a new owner. Sorry, Michael. But things are a disaster there. They had Kenny Atkinson signed, or close to signed, agreed to sign. And then they basically said, sorry, you can't pick your assistant coaches. And he went, I'll see you later. Is this a serious organization or not? I think the answer was no. That's the impression they give. Like even just the hiring of Mitch Kupchak to be the general manager didn't scream serious a couple of years ago. They make a lot of questionable moves. The draft was horrendous last year. Thought it was pretty horrendous this year as well. Had so many more opportunities to do better things. They've not made a single free agency move. I guess the Bridges thing is holding things up. And now they bring back Steve Clifford, who is a totally fine NBA coach. It just offers absolutely no foresight, no vision, nothing. The problem I have fantasy-wise for Clifford is that it's going to slow things down. He's going to bring that pace down, which is one of the highest in the NBA. He historically has been a really slow-paced coach. Now, LaMelo Ball's a really fast player, a fast transition guy, so you hope that bridges the gap somewhat, but I don't think they'll play as fast. And Clifford, historically, has hated rookies, hated playing them, doesn't trust them, and tries to prefer defensive players. So while initially we go, their center position's a disaster. Maybe Mark Williams gets in there. With Steve Clifford, I go, there's almost no way that Mark Williams is going to be an opening night starter. Maybe he surprises me. There's almost no way that Kelly Oubre is playing 30-plus minutes because defensively he's really bad. And you could see a guy like Cody Martin being easily preferred over Kelly Oubre because of what Steve Clifford values. I don't think there'll be too many issues with LaMelo Ball. There were issues with LaMelo Ball and James Borrego last season. So it's not like Ball's coming from a place where he's playing 36 minutes a night and had freedom to do everything, because he didn't. He played like 32. And I don't really think it gets worse under Clifford. But the worry you have is maybe the upside of an Oubre, the value of a Mark Williams. I can see them starting Mason Plumlee opening night because of Steve Clifford. The other thing that impacts the projections is Gordon Hayward. Like, the dude's never healthy ever since he broke his leg. There's persistent lower body injuries, which you understand why that would be the case. He had a significant, I think, grade 3 ankle sprain last season, which is like a month-long injury. It also involves some bone chip issues. He is older. He probably should be traded. It was a bad contract when it was signed. It looks worse now. He is 32. If he is hurt and he misses time again, then Cody Martin, McDaniels, Oubre, all these guys get big boosts. But if he's healthy, he could be a top 60 player. It's legitimately possible. We've seen him be a top 20 player. He's never going to be that again. But we've seen it before. He's still a really good player. And without Bridges there, he's got a chance to really up his usage this season. That is, if he stays healthy, which of course is a gigantic if. Who's a breakout candidate? And I don't really ever know how to frame the term breakout candidate better, but I was listening to a Real GM podcast with Danny LaRue I don't remember who the guests were he had on, so I apologize for that. But he said, he's talking breakout player. I'm going to steal his definition here. He says, it's just a player that not necessarily one who goes from out of the rotation to starting or from good to all-star, but someone that we start talking about more, who enters our collective consciousness more, who plays a bigger role and becomes a more important player. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. We're going to talk fantasy sleepers later. We're going to talk last round flyers later. But breakout guys that we could start to talk about more. Players that go, oh, this guy is now getting attention. And the two guys I have on this team are Jalen McDaniels, who I really like. I really think there's upside in him. And I said this on a show a while ago, a little bit hot takey. But there is absolutely more than a 0% chance that Jalen has a better fantasy season than Jaden McDaniels. I think he's quite a better scorer. And with Bridges gone, if Hayward gets hurt, if Oubre's defense isn't up to snuff, Jaden in Minnesota is in a situation where I don't know if he's ever going to touch the ball. Jalen, he might touch the ball. He's interesting. It's a name to watch. And I also think heading into year 4, PJ Washington Jr. with no Bridges, he should start. He should play more minutes. He won't get as many minutes as center because this roster's gone from having no good centers to having still no good centers, but like 5 mediocre ones. So there's just not that many minutes at center. But he'll play a lot more at power forward. Hopefully he gets more consistent with his shooting and his rebounding. But the opportunity's there. Minutes, usage, we love those two things. Get more minutes, get more usage. You get into the collective consciousness more. Like PJ Washington, you can get pretty late. We'll talk about him later on. Yeah, top 60 season for him. It's not outrageous. It's not likely. It's not outrageous, I don't think. So let's look at sleepers. There's quite a few for the Hornets, and this happens often. You get teams where there are just a lot of people undervalued, and you get teams where there are players overvalued. And in general, as a general rule, the teams that nobody cares about, the teams that are in small markets, they have nothing exciting going on, and honestly, this team might be, outside of LaMelo Ball, the most boring, irrelevant team in the NBA this season. Sorry, Hornets fans. It's just outside of LaMelo, they had a terrible offseason. Their coach is uninspiring. Their GM's uninspiring. Their owner makes bad decisions. There's the Bridges stuff. They're boring as shit, but it leads to guys being undervalued. Terry Rozier is at 59 on Yahoo. It's too low, man. He was 46th last season. No reason he shouldn't be at least in that 4th round, if not a 3rd round type of player. He's had 2 solid seasons of being an elite level shooter, or at least a very, very good shooter, prior to that where he struggled. Now, maybe that drops back off. It is possible. He should see a little bit more usage. His minutes should be pretty stable. He gets to the line, hits his free throws. 59 is too low. His ADP is 50 on Fantrax. It's 55 on ESPN, which is all okay. There's still value in that. This is a early 4th, probably late 3rd round sort of player. If it floats your boat that someone doesn't get turnovers at Skews rankings, remember, then he gets ranked higher. So just maybe you don't go too hard on him, don't go too early on him. But even in points leagues, he was 52nd last season, 35 fantasy points. I think that jumps up. I think Gordon Hayward's ranked too low or getting drafted too low. 108 Yahoo, 103 Fantrax, 112 ESPN. I get there is an injury risk. Hayward is going out to the top 100 in every draft I do, basically. And this is, on a per-game basis, he had top 85 minimum, I would guess, for category leagues. For points leagues, probably, again, top 85 minimum. With top 60, top 50 upside. There is a huge injury risk there associated with him, but he's not injured now. There are players going into the season injured. Chris Middleton, Jaren Jackson, Lonzo Ball. They're going into the season injured. Yeah, Hayward's a guy you can get late and get in round 10, round 9, round 10 that I really like getting. And small forward's a really weird and weak position in fantasy. You can get him just to fill that small forward spot. Get him in round 10. Maybe you get 50 spots of extra value. And then he gets hurt and you drop him. And you go, thanks for that, but I'll see you later. PJ Washington, 106. His ADP is on Yahoo. It's 93 on Fantrax, which is more in line. It's 134 on ESPN. This is a top 100 player. This is a round 8 sort of player. Maybe round 7. As I said, he could get to top 60. I've got him projected at 13 and 6 with a couple of threes, a steal, and a block. 16 and 7. 16 and 7 upside with 1.5 blocks. 16 and 7 with 1.5 blocks is top 60 very easily. And that's not actually hard to get when he's playing more minutes, a little bit more usage. If the shot starts to fall at a higher rate because he's relatively inefficient, that's 134 is insane. Like, absolutely insane. 106 is too low on Yahoo as well. Jalen McDaniels. Now, I'm probably not drafting Jalen in most 12-team formats. But at 282 on Yahoo or 278 on ESPN, that's saying don't draft him in 20-team leagues, which is wrong. He's more of he's a very strong 16-team league player, probably a 14-team league option, and someone also that I would consider, spoiler alert for later in the show, as a late round guy. Round 13, round 14, if you go to 14 rounds, take a flyer and see what happens. As much as I don't think James Bouknight is good, I think he's going to play. And he's ranked at 431 on Yahoo. And that is the cue for your question to enter the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Bowl. So in the subject line, put Hornets Cats or Hornets Points if you want category league or points league. And the answer to the question is going to be, what is James Bouknight's rank on Yahoo? And the answer is 431. Someone sent me a photo of their dog in their application they got in. Doesn't mean you have to send a photo of a dog. They send me jokes, they send me stories. Someone told me, hey, I grew up around where you live. All right, cool, whatever. Does that get them in? Maybe. Hey, I support the Bulldogs. Does that get you in? Maybe. Sometimes. Put in stories. But the thing you got to have in there is, what is James Bouknight's Yahoo rank? And it's 431 at the time of recording. So that's how you get in. Now, again, I don't think Bouknight's good, but in a 30-team league, a 20-team league, I'd take a flyer because I think this season he's going to play. I think he's going to play poorly, but I do think he's going to play. Because this team is underrated, there's a lot of interesting sleeper options here. And there's not really any busts, except for some reason on Fantrax, JT Thor has an ADP of 40. Now that is obviously some sort of error. There's something that is completely screwed up with some of their ADPs. There's just random players slotted in highly, and Thor is one of them. Just so you're aware, do not pick JT Thor at pick 40.
We know each other. He's a friend from work.
You don't do it. Now, in terms of options that you can take in the last round of a fantasy draft, there's a few guys here because, again, there's uncertainty. Cody Martin or Jalen McDaniels. If Hayward is hurt, there's value there. With Bridges gone, they might play 30 minutes. And they're in that 150, 160 range who could push to 100, 95. I'd probably prefer McDaniels over Martin, but I'd prefer the other two guys here over both of them. And one of those is Kelly Oubre Jr., who I don't project particularly highly because I think I'm worried about his minutes because of his defensive issues. He can be a scorer, but he's very up and down with his shooting. He improved quite a bit last season shooting, but 2 years ago he was terrible in Golden State. He doesn't really get much in terms of assists. He's one of the worst assist players in the league. He's not a high rebounder. He doesn't really get many steals or blocks. He's quite a bad free throw shooter as well. He can be a guy that wows you with some scoring and three-point shooting. And in points league, that probably gives him a little bit more value. I would consider Oubre as a last round guy. In a lot of situations, he will go earlier than that though. He's ranked 132 on Yahoo. So if he's there, all right, fine. In the last round, I'll take a crack at him. I'm not massively high on him. I don't think there's a top 100 season incoming for Kelly Oubre. I also think there's a big opportunity for Mark Williams.
Oh, hi, Mark.
But Steve Clifford's coaching. So Mark Williams, if we looked at a team and go, well, this is a team that needs a center. They got a center. They chose the wrong one. Considering they had Jalen Duren and decided to trade him for 4 future second-round picks. Cool. That's not true. I think there was also maybe a first-round pick in there that can't be any higher than like 24 or something like that. It was not a good trade, whatever. Mark Williams is their guy now. I don't think he's going to start. In fact, if Clifford opens the season with Plumlee as the starter and Nick Richards as the backup, don't be surprised. Or JT Thor or Kai Jones, because he hates rookies. But the upside of Williams is much higher than any of those guys. So if you're lacking in blocks or lacking in big man numbers, and we don't know what's going to happen with Clifford and Mark Williams, you take him with that last pick because 65% shooting, 7 rebounds, 2 blocks, 9 points in 25 minutes is distinctly possible. The biggest question mark there is 25 minutes. But if something happens and Clifford's had an epiphany and just goes, man, this is actually Mason Plumlee and he's actually bad, we figured that out, I'll try Marky Williams. I don't think it happens, but if it does, then value is clearly there. So let's look at the rest of the roster before we get out of here. Because I haven't talked about LaMelo Ball. He'll start alongside Rozier, Hayward, Washington, and Plumlee, I think. LaMelo, I talked about it on a show earlier this week about first-round picks. To me, he's a first-round pick pretty clearly in pretty much every format. He will or should theoretically improve over last season. I had him 8th in head-to-head leagues. I got him 9th in roto leagues. I had him 10th in points leagues. So back-end first-round player. He's getting drafted around that same zone. He was 16th on a per-game basis last season, played 32 minutes. I think that improves. I think he plays more minutes. He shot the ball really well from 3 and from the free throw line. He gets steals, he gets assists, he gets rebounds, he scores. He's really good. I don't know what more I need to talk about with him. He's really good. Rozier we spoke about already. As a player, you can pick 3rd to 4th round. So the 35 to 45 range, I think, is probably right for him. Probably a little bit better in a category league versus a points league. Hayward, outside the top 100. We love that pick. Washington, in the 80s, if you want to go. This is what I've noticed, and I'm going to do a whole show on this. Assists and points go off the board really early in fantasy drafts. Some blocks do too. It can be hard to find blocks, as I talked about on a show, and I don't remember who it was with. We discussed, Matt Smith. We talked about the center tiers. We talked about blocks. But what I tell you happens, when you get to about round 9, you cannot find a rebounder. After that, maybe it's round 10. Rebounds are really abundant, and then they're gone. And you cannot find rebounders. You're stuck with, JaVale McGee. Like, rebounding players, boosting your rebounds becomes impossible in the late rounds. There's just no one around. Also why double-doubles is a terrible category. You cannot find double-doubles off a waiver wire. There's just a certain group of guys that do it. Rebounds are gone. They're abundant, and then they're gone. They just disappear by round 11. If you wait until round 11 to grab some big men to get some boards, forget it. It's not happening. PJ Washington's not the greatest rebounder, but at least he's a big-ish man, playing a big man position who should get more minutes, and he's interesting. Plumlee, talk about rebounds, he can get them. I don't really care for it. He's one of the worst free throw shooters in the NBA. He did start shooting with his opposite hand in the second half of the year, and that did improve his free throw shooting somewhat. I wouldn't trust it. I don't feel like he's going to play a ton of minutes, but I think he's going to be a streamable player if Clifford really leans into him. I'd leave him on the wire for now. Talked about Martin and McDaniels. They're just like last round flyer types. McDaniels probably has higher upside than Martin. And then Oubre's got higher upside again, but I do worry about, if I'm Steve Clifford and I'm not, but I'm looking, I know that Martin's going to defend well and Oubre's going to defend poorly and not pass. And I don't, when you're weighing those two guys together, which way is Clifford going to lean? That's my worry with Oubre. You got Williams, we just spoke about. Book Knight, who I think is actually really bad, but they have no guards on this team. Their guards are Rozier and Ball, and that is it. That is it. They signed a bunch of guys to camp deals. Jalen Crutcher, Anthony DeRougie, I think it's pronounced, Isaiah Whaley, and Jalen Sims. Crutcher and Sims are both guards, but don't expect them to do anything. Their guards are Ball, Rozier, and Book Knight. Oubre is more of I guess you could call him a shooting guard. He's more of a 3. Cody Martin's more of a 3, so maybe a little bit of shooting guard in there. But that's it. That's it. There's no guards. There's no point guards. There's one point guard on this team. One. And that's LaMelo Ball. One. Book Knight's not a point guard. Rozier's not a point guard. They're going to have to pretend they're point guards, though, because of the way this roster's been horrendously constructed. I think JT Thor is a better option than Nick Richards. I think he's a better option than Kai Jones. Doesn't mean he's going to do much. Jones, just one of the worst draft picks last season. The only worst player in the top 20 was James Bouknight. Jones just doesn't seem like he knows what to do, and there are so many other center options. There is a possibility he blows up out of nowhere and gets minutes at the backup 4, gets minutes at the 5 ahead of Mark Williams. I think that's highly unlikely. But he's got athleticism. There's some shot blocking. He showed a willingness to shoot threes at Summer League. They didn't go in, at all. but he showed a willingness to shoot, and sometimes that's important. He's at least, I'd be watching Kai Jones more than Nick Richards, but I don't think he's very good. And then Bryce McGowan, who they drafted in the second round this season. I thought that was a good draft pick. He's on a two-way. He's a guard. Maybe just because they have literally no guards, McGowan's has to play a little bit. I don't think he's going to be really ready to do anything this season, but the dearth of guard-sized players or ball handlers is screaming out that maybe there's an opportunity. But if there's one thing that Steve Clifford hates, it's rookies. And I don't imagine he's going to love two-way contract rookies that much either. And that's what McGowan's is. So that will do it for me today. Don't forget to follow this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on Odyssey. If you're on YouTube, thumb it up and leave those juicy comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.